The linoleum floors of Northwood Regional Hospital gleamed under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, a sterile, off-white sea that reflected the quiet hum of a building holding its breath. Anna Smith knew the sound well. It was the sound of waiting for the next code. Blue, the next car crash, the next life to spill out onto one of these pristine floors she was paid to keep clean. Her cart was her world. A yellow plastic vessel filled with the tools of her trade, bottles of disinfectant, microfiber cloths, a mop with a head of graying cotton strings, and a squeaking wheel that announced her presence long before she turned a corner. It was a monotonous, invisible existence. She liked it that way. Invisibility was a kind of armor. She was just Anna, the janitor. The quiet woman with haunted eyes, who did her job with a meticulous, almost reverent efficiency, and then disappeared. No one knew her last name was Sharma, or that the hands that now pushed a mop had once held a beating human heart. Dr. Mark Cross certainly did not. He strode down the hallway like he owned it, a retinue of beleaguered residents trailing in his wake. He was the chief of trauma surgery, a man whose ego was as sharp and as dangerous as his favorite scalpel. He saw the world in terms of solvable problems and incompetent people. He barely saw Anna at all. And if you see a GCS below 8, you intubate. You do not wait. You do not ask. You do not hope for a miracle. We are doctors, not priests. His voice echoed, sharp and condescending. He stopped, noticing a smudge on the floor near Anna's cart. He glanced at her, then at the smudge, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He did not say a word to her. He did not have to. The look was enough. You are a smudge. You are out of place. Anna simply moved her cart, dipped her mop into the bucket, and erased the imperfection. She kept her head down, her gray uniform a cloak of anonymity. She was a ghost in the machine, and that was exactly how she had designed it. For 3 years, it had worked. 3 years of quiet. 3 years of scrubbing away the blood of others instead of being drenched in it. Then the siren started. It was not the usual city ambulance wail. This was different. A deeper, more guttural sound, joined by the thrum of heavy engines. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. The doors to the emergency bay burst open, not with the frantic energy of a typical Saturday night, but with a disciplined, terrifying urgency. Men in tactical gear, not paramedic uniforms, swarmed in, flanking a gurney that moved with the precision of a military drill. "Clear a trauma bay! Now!" one of them yelled. He wore the insignia of an army ranger. On the gurney was a man, a mountain of a man, even lying down. His uniform was shredded and soaked in a dark, arterial red. Field dressings were hastily applied to his chest and leg, but they were already overwhelmed. Dr. Cross, drawn by the commotion, was there in an instant. His arrogance was replaced by a focused intensity. This was his arena. "Get him to Trauma 1. What have we got?" he commanded, falling into step beside the gurney. Multiple GSWs, high caliber. Possible collapsed lung. Femoral artery bleed is barely contained. He's lost a lot of blood, but his pressure is still fighting, the ranger escort reported, his voice tight. Name's Sergeant Major David Cole. He's important. Cole was also conscious. Delirious, but conscious. And violent. As they wheeled him into the trauma bay, his eyes, wild with pain and shock, fixed on a nurse. He lunged, a feral roar tearing from his throat, his cuffed hand swinging wildly. "Don't touch me! Get back!" The room erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses and orderlies tried to hold him down, but it was like trying to restrain a cornered bear. He was fighting phantoms, his mind still on a battlefield thousands of miles away. "Sedate him," Cross ordered. 10 of midazolam now." A nurse tried to get a line in, but Cole thrashed, his powerful leg kicking out and sending a steel instrument tray flying. It clattered against the far wall, scalpels and clamps scattering across the floor like metallic teeth. 3 nurses jumped back, startled and afraid. "He's going to code if we can't get control of him," a resident shouted, his voice strained. Anna had been cleaning a spill just outside the trauma bay. The crash of the tray drew her gaze. She saw the blood. She saw the panic. She saw the soldier. And something in her, a thing she had buried under 3 years of bleach and ammonia, cracked open. She pushed her cart to the side. She walked into the room. She moved with a quiet purpose that cut through the noise and the fear. Her janitor's uniform was a stark contrast to the scrubs and white coats. She was a gray sheep walking into a den of panicked wolves. Dr. Cross noticed her first. "What the hell are you doing? Get out of here. This is a sterile field." Anna ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the soldier, on Sergeant Major Cole. She walked to the side of the gurney, stopping just within his line of sight. She did not try to touch him. She did not speak. She simply stood there, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Cole's thrashing slowed. His wild eyes, clouded with pain, struggled to focus. They swept past the doctors, the nurses, the glaring lights. And then they found her. Recognition flickered. Confusion. Disbelief. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The feral animal was gone. The soldier returned. His body went rigid, every muscle locked. Despite the blood, the pain, the tubes snaking from his body, he tried to push himself up. He brought his right hand, the one not cuffed to the rail, up in a sharp, perfect salute. His knuckles were split and bloody, but the gesture was precise, unwavering. "Ma'am," he rasped, his voice a raw whisper of pure, unadulterated respect. "Permission to speak, ma'am." The room fell silent. Utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the frantic, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. Every doctor, every nurse, every resident stared. First at the saluting, grievously wounded ranger, and then at the janitor. The janitor with the mop, standing in their trauma bay. Dr. Cross looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung slightly open. He looked from the soldier to Anna, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. "What is happening?" Anna did not look at him. She held the sergeant major's gaze. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of command. "At ease, Sergeant Major." Cole's arm dropped. The tension left his body. He sagged back onto the gurney, his eyes still locked on her, filled with a desperate, trusting light. He was still in agony, but he was no longer fighting. He was following orders. Then the monitor screamed. A long, piercing tone. Ventricular fibrillation. "He's in V-fib! He's crashing!" a nurse yelled, breaking the spell. Dr. Cross lunged for the defibrillator paddles. "Charge to 200! Everybody clear!" "No!" The word cut through the air like a blade. It was Anna's voice, quiet, but packed with an authority that stopped every person in that room cold. Cross turned, paddles in hand, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "I didn't ask for your input. Charge the paddles." "It won't work," Anna said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She was already moving, her hand snapping on a pair of sterile gloves from a nearby box with practiced ease. "His heart isn't empty. It's full." "What are you talking about?" Cross spat. "He's in cardiac arrest." "He's in tamponade," she corrected, her eyes scanning the monitor, her brain processing the chaotic symphony of data with terrifying speed. The GSW to the chest. It nicked the pericardium. It's filling with blood. You shock him now, you'll just be cooking a dead man's heart. He needs a needle, not electricity. She turned to a stunned resident. "I need an 18-gauge spinal needle, a 60 cubic centimeter syringe, and a sterile drape. Now." It was not a request. It was an order. The resident, a young man named Peterson, just stared at her, paralyzed by confusion. A janitor was giving medical commands. "Move!" Anna's voice cracked like a whip. Peterson jumped and scrambled to the supply cabinet. Dr. Cross stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the patient. "You will not touch my patient. Security, get her out of my trauma bay." Anna met his furious gaze with eyes that were suddenly ancient. Eyes that had seen things Dr. Mark Cross could not even imagine in his worst nightmares. The quiet, invisible janitor was gone. In her place stood someone else, a commander. "Your patient has less than 90 seconds before his brain turns to soup," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You can stand there and let your ego kill him, or you can get out of my way and let me save his life. Your choice, doctor." From the gurney, a weak voice mumbled. It was Cole. His eyes were barely open, but he was fighting to speak. "Listen. To her. Angel of Kandahar." He coughed, a wet, bloody sound, and his eyes rolled back. The monitor flatlined. "A systole." "He's gone," a nurse whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, he's not!" Anna snapped. She shoved past the frozen Dr. Cross without a second thought. Peterson arrived with the needle and syringe, holding them out with a trembling hand. "I said now!" she growled, snatching them from him. She ripped open the packaging with her teeth. "Someone get on his chest, hard and fast. Don't stop until I tell you." A burly orderly started chest compressions. The sickening crack of ribs echoed in the silent room. Anna moved with a terrifying economy of motion. She palpated the area just below the xiphoid process, her fingers finding the precise spot with an instinct that defied medical school textbooks. She held the long spinal needle like a dart. "This is insane," Cross breathed, watching her. "You can't do a pericardiocentesis blind. You'll puncture his heart." "Watch me," Anna said without looking up. She pushed the needle in. A single, smooth, confident motion. She advanced it slowly, her other hand on the plunger of the syringe, creating negative pressure. The room held its breath. 4 centimeters. 5. 6. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the syringe filled with dark, non-clotting blood. "Got it," she stated. She pulled back 60 cubic centimeters of fluid, her hand rock steady. The monitor, which had been a flat, green line of death, suddenly blipped. A weak, disorganized rhythm appeared. "I need another syringe," she yelled. A nurse, her eyes wide with awe, slapped one into her waiting hand. Anna filled it. And then a third. 180 cubic centimeters of blood drawn from the sac around his heart. The rhythm on the monitor organized itself. A sinus tachycardia, fast and thready. But it was a rhythm, a viable one. "We have a pulse," the resident Peterson said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "A weak one, but it's there." Anna withdrew the needle and secured it. She looked at the orderly. "Stop compressions." The room was silent again. But this was a different silence. It was the silence of a congregation that had just witnessed a miracle. They were no longer looking at a janitor. They were looking at something else entirely. Sergeant Major David Cole was alive. Barely, but he was alive. Dr. Mark Cross stared at the monitor, then at Anna. The arrogance had been sandblasted from his face, replaced by a raw, naked bewilderment. He looked at her hands, the hands that had just defied death, and then at her simple, gray uniform. The disconnect was a chasm in his understanding of the world. Who in God's name are you?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anna stripped off her bloody gloves and dropped them into a biohazard bin. The commander receded, the ghost slipping back into place. Her shoulders slumped slightly. The exhaustion, the adrenaline, the weight of the last 3 years crashed down on her. "My name is Anna," she said softly, her voice returning to its quiet, unassuming tone. I clean the floors. She turned and walked out of the trauma bay, leaving a room full of medical professionals, standing in stunned, reverent silence. Cross found her 20 minutes later in a small, cramped janitor's closet at the end of a forgotten hallway. The air was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner. She was sitting on an overturned bucket, her head in her hands. The squeaky-wheeled cart stood sentinel beside her. He did not say anything at first. He just stood in the doorway, watching the woman who had just performed a 1-in-a-million procedure and then retreated to a closet. He's stable, Cross said finally. We rushed him to the OR. The pericardium was nicked, just like you said. A fragment from the bullet. Another 5 minutes and, well, you saved his life. You did something I've only read about in textbooks on military medicine. Anna did not look up. Good. Good. Cross took a step into the closet. The space was so small he was almost standing over her. That's all you have to say? You perform a miracle, and then you hide in a closet with a mop? He was not angry anymore. He was desperate to understand. The sergeant major, he called you ma'am. He saluted you. He called you the Angel of Kandahar. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I need you to tell me what's going on. I need you to tell me who you are. Not as a matter of curiosity, as a matter of professional necessity. I have a patient in my ICU who only seems to respond to his janitor. Anna finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the ghost fully present in their depths. The mask of invisibility had been shattered, and she looked lost. My name, she said, her voice heavy with a history he could not begin to comprehend, is Dr. Anya Sharma. I was a major in the United States Army. Forward surgical team, attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment, and later, other units. The title hung in the air between them. Doctor. Major. Cross felt a wave of shame wash over him. The smirks, the dismissive glances, the way he had ordered her out of his trauma bay. He had been yelling at a decorated combat surgeon, a field-grade officer. I apologize, Dr. Sharma, he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. My behavior was unacceptable. Anya waved a dismissive hand. It doesn't matter. It's what I wanted. Why? Cross asked, genuinely bewildered. Why this? A surgeon with your skills. You could be running a department at Johns Hopkins. Instead, you're here, mopping floors. Why would you throw all that away? The question seemed to break something in her. A wall she had meticulously constructed for years crumbled into dust. Her gaze unfocused, looking past him, past the closet, into a memory painted in sand and blood. I am standing in a sea of red. The floor of the C-130 is slick with it. It's a Moscow. A VBIED hit a checkpoint outside the wire in Helmand Province. 12 casualties, all critical. We're a flying trauma bay, a metal tube filled with screaming and the smell of burnt flesh and copper. I'm the only surgeon on board. The Angel, they call me. A bitter joke for the work I do. I move from body to body, a Valkyrie choosing who lives and who dies. Cole is one of them, a younger man then, a staff sergeant. A piece of shrapnel the size of a fist is buried in his thigh. He's bleeding out. I put my knee on his femoral artery, screaming for a tourniquet, my hands already working to pack the wound. To my left is a kid, 19, maybe. His name is Miller. He's looking at me, his eyes wide with fear. His chest is a mess. I can see his lung through a hole in his ribs. He's trying to say something. Mom. Maybe. I have to choose. Triage is a brutal calculus, the art of the impossible choice. Who has the best chance of survival? Cole is strong. The wound is manageable if I can stop the bleed. Miller is already gone. He just doesn't know it yet. I focus on Cole. I save him. While I'm working, Miller dies. His eyes go vacant. He just stops. But he isn't the one who haunts me. Across from me is another ranger, Corporal Evans. His injuries aren't as dramatic. Abdominal wound. He's quiet. Too quiet. That should have been the sign. I tag him as delayed. Yellow. Stable enough to wait. It's a mistake. A fatal one. By the time I get to him, 20 minutes later, he's gone into hypovolemic shock. An internal bleed I missed. A slow, silent killer. I crack his chest right there on the floor of the plane, trying to find the source, my hands deep inside him. But it's too late. I lose him. I chose wrong. Anya's voice was a deadened whisper when she spoke again, pulling herself back to the cramped closet in Northwood, Virginia. I made a mistake, a triage error. A young man died because I was overwhelmed, and I prioritized the wrong patient. They gave me a medal for saving 11 lives that day, but I killed one. I walked away. I couldn't hold a scalpel anymore. I couldn't bear the weight of that choice. She looked down at her hands. So I chose this. Cleaning. Wiping things away. It's simple. There are no life or death decisions. Just dirt. Cross was speechless. He saw not a failure, but a hero burdened by an impossible standard. The kind of trauma civilian doctors never faced. The sheer weight of combat medicine. You didn't kill him, doctor, he said softly. War killed him. You were just the one fighting it. Before she could respond, his pager blared. He glanced at it. It's Cole. His pressure is dropping again. They think he's throwing clots. Anya was on her feet in an instant. The ghost was gone again. The major was back. What are his coags? Did you start the massive transfusion protocol? We're trying, but there's something else. Something we're not seeing. It's the fragments, she said, already moving past him, down the hall toward the ICU. The bullet wasn't standard military issue. It's designed to shatter. There are probably dozens of tiny metal slivers in his system, causing micro-lacerations. You won't see them on a CT. You have to find them by hand. They reached the ICU, a hive of activity around Cole's bed. Anya pushed through, her janitor uniform parting the sea of scrubs. She looked at the monitors, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Get him back to the OR, she commanded, and get me a gown and gloves. The head ECU nurse looked at Dr. Cross, confused. Cross nodded, his face set with a newfound certainty. You heard her. This is Dr. Sharma. She's taking the lead on this case. Do exactly what she says. The nurse's eyes widened, but she nodded and began barking orders. The transition was seamless. Authority had been transferred, earned in blood and skill. Anya was already scrubbing in when the hospital administrator, a portly man named Henderson, with a perpetually worried expression, intercepted Cross. Mark, what is going on? Henderson hissed, his eyes darting toward the operating room where a janitor was preparing for surgery. I'm getting calls from the Pentagon. A general is on his way here. They said this man, this sergeant major, is a national asset. And you're letting a custodian operate on him? That custodian is Major Anya Sharma, one of the most decorated trauma surgeons to come out of the recent conflicts, Cross said, his voice cold. And right now, she's the only person on this continent who has a chance of saving his life. So I suggest you go back to your office and handle the general. I'll handle the medicine. Henderson paled and scurried away. Inside the OR, Anya was a whirlwind of focused energy. The room orbited around her. She was not just performing surgery, she was teaching a master class in trauma. The standard laparotomy incision is too slow, she explained, as she made a swift, clean cut. In a situation like this, speed is everything. We go wide, get exposure, and find the bleeders. Forget neatness. We're plugging holes in a sinking ship. She worked with a speed and precision that left the other surgeons breathless. Her hands moved like they had a separate intelligence, clamping, suturing, exploring. "There," she said, pointing with a hemostat. "Against the mesenteric artery. A tiny fragment, barely a millimeter wide. See how it's tearing the vessel every time his heart beats? Give me the forceps." For 2 hours, she hunted them. Tiny, vicious pieces of metal that were slowly killing the man on the table. She found 17 of them, 17 potential death sentences. Finally, she was done. The bleeding was controlled. The pressure was stable. She had, for a second time, pulled Sergeant Major Cole back from the brink. As she was closing, the OR doors opened. A man in a crisp army dress uniform stood there. A single star gleamed on his shoulder. Behind him stood another man, taller, leaner, in a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed out of place in the hospital. He had cold, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The man in the suit was the one who held the real power. Anya finished her last suture and stripped off her gloves. She met the gaze of the man in the suit. A flicker of something, recognition, fear, resignation, passed through her eyes. She knew him. "Colonel Sterling," she said, her voice flat. Except he wasn't a colonel anymore. The man beside him was the general. Sterling was something else now. Something with no rank and unlimited authority. "Major Sharma," Sterling said, his voice smooth as polished river stone. "It's been a long time. You've been difficult to find." He stepped into the OR, his expensive shoes squeaking on the sterile floor. He glanced at the stabilized Sergeant Major, then back at Anya. "Impressive work. As always. We could have used you in Marib last month." "I'm retired," Anya said, her voice tight. "People like us don't retire, Anya. We just find new shadows to hide in," Sterling replied. He gestured for her to follow him. "We need to talk. Somewhere private." They ended up in a sterile conference room. Dr. Cross insisted on being present. Sterling allowed it with an amused, indulgent smile. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Sterling began, sitting at the head of the table. "Corporal Evans, Helmand Province, the incident that prompted your sabbatical." Anya flinched at the name. "I know what happened. I was there." "No," Sterling said, leaning forward. "You know what you saw. You don't know what was happening. Evans wasn't just another ranger. He was carrying intel, encrypted data on a subdermal chip, data on a high-value target we had been hunting for years." Anya stared at him, her blood running cold. "The VBIED wasn't random," Sterling continued. "They were targeting him. When the Mascal hit, we knew the enemy would have an asset on that transport, ready to recover the chip from Evans's body. We couldn't risk it. His death had to look like a result of his initial injuries, a casualty of war." The pieces clicked into place in Anya's mind with sickening clarity. The quiet patient, the bleed she had missed. "You're telling me," her voice was a strangled whisper, "you're telling me he was salvageable?" "He had a survivable wound, yes," Sterling confirmed, his face impassive. "But the mission was not to save Corporal Evans. The mission was to protect the intel. Your choice, your triage error, was a gift. You deprioritized him. You let him die quietly, naturally. You inadvertently completed the mission for us. If you had taken him to surgery, the asset on your crew, a medic we later identified, would have retrieved the chip. Your mistake saved the entire operation." Anya felt the floor drop out from under her. The guilt that had been her constant companion for 3 years, the ghost that had driven her into hiding, was a lie. Her greatest failure was, in the cold, brutal calculus of men like Sterling, her greatest success. She had not killed a soldier. She had been used as an unwitting tool to sacrifice one. The revelation was not freeing. It was horrifying. It was a betrayal so profound, it stole her breath. "You let me believe I killed him," she said, the words dripping with venom. You let me destroy my own life over a lie. Your suffering was a necessary component of your cover, Sterling said without a hint of remorse. Your disappearance, your genuine trauma, made the story believable. No one would ever suspect the truth. Dr. Cross stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Get out," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my spittle." Sterling ignored him. His eyes were locked on Anya. "The world hasn't gotten any safer since you left, Major. There's a new threat. A biological agent. We have an operative who was exposed, but he's gone to ground in a hot zone. He needs an exfil, and he needs a surgeon who can treat him in the field. Someone who can work outside the lines. Someone they'll never see coming." He slid a thin file across the table. "We need the Angel of Kandahar back. This isn't an order, it's a request. Your country needs you." This was the choice. Return to the world of shadows and lies. The world that had broken her, or stay here, in the quiet safety she had built. But that safety was already gone. Sterling had found her. The ghost was out of the bottle. I could run again. Find a new hospital, a new name, a new mop. I could spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or I could stop running. Anya looked at Sterling, at the man who represented the system that had used her and thrown her away. Then she looked at Dr. Cross, the man who had judged her and then championed her. She thought of Sergeant Major Cole, lying in the ICU, alive because she had refused to stay hidden. She finally knew what she had to do. She pushed the file back across the table toward Sterling. "No," she said. Sterling raised an eyebrow. "No?" "My country doesn't need me to be your ghost anymore," Anya said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. "It needs its soldiers to come home alive. My place is here." She turned to Dr. Cross. "You have soldiers coming into your ER from the nearby base all the time, don't you? Men and women with injuries you don't understand, carrying trauma you can't see." Cross nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "Every day." "Then let me build something here," Anya continued, her voice filled with passion. "A bridge, a place that understands both worlds, a center for combat trauma and veteran care. We can train your surgeons in the techniques I know. We can provide specialized care for returning soldiers. We can do more good right here than I could ever do hiding in the shadows for him." She pointed a trembling, angry finger at Sterling. Cross's face broke into a wide, triumphant grin. "I've already spoken to the board. And the general. He seems to think Sergeant Major Cole's recovery is a pretty strong argument for giving you whatever you want. The funding is already being wired. The directorship is yours, Dr. Sharma, if you want it." Sterling stood up. He looked at Anya, a flicker of disappointment in his cold eyes, but also a sliver of respect. He had lost. "A shame," he said softly. He turned and walked out of the room, a shadow retreating back into the darkness. Anya stood there for a long moment, the weight of 3 years finally lifting from her shoulders. She was not Anna the janitor anymore. She was not the Angel of Kandahar, a myth forged in blood and fire. She was Dr. Anya Sharma, and she was finally home. 6 months later, the Northwood Center for Combat Trauma was a reality. It was a state-of-the-art wing of the hospital, bustling with energy and purpose. Anya stood in the center of it all, not in a janitor's uniform or blood-soaked fatigues, but in clean, crisp surgical scrubs. She was briefing a new team of residents, Dr. Cross standing beside her, observing with pride. "Forget what you learned about clean margins and textbook closures," she told them, her voice confident and clear. "Out there, you don't have time. You have the golden hour, and every second is a battle. Today, we're going to learn how to pack a wound so tightly it can hold back Niagara Falls. We're going to learn how to crack a chest with a Leatherman and a prayer. We're going to learn how to save a life when everything has gone wrong." A familiar face appeared in the doorway, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Sergeant Major David Cole grinned at her. "Heard you were scaring the new kids, ma'am," he said, his voice full of warmth. Anya smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Just teaching them how to be ready, Sergeant Major." "Well, if anyone can teach them, it's you," he said. He looked around the bustling center, at the lives being changed, the knowledge being passed on. "You built something good here, ma'am, something that matters." She had. She had taken the shattered pieces of her past, the trauma and the betrayal, and she had built a sanctuary. She was no longer running from the ghosts. She was teaching others how to fight them. Her war was not over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. And here, finally, she was winning.